2 weeks in a row now, we have had essentially the same story from Mark's Gospel. In chapters 8 and chapter 9, really the same kind of a story, almost the exact same story, told in two different ways. First, last week's reading from chapter 8, Jesus asked the disciples, and even if you weren't here last week, you'll know this part of the story, right? Jesus asked the disciples, who people think he is? And they say, well, some are saying Elijah, some are saying John the Baptist, some are saying one of the other prophets. And Jesus says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter almost nails it. He says, you are the Messiah. To which Jesus says, correct. Correct. And then he goes on to tell them what being the Messiah means. Namely, his rejection, suffering, murder, and ultimately resurrection. And then Peter, get this, tries to correct Jesus. Can you imagine? Yeah? First known instance of mansplaining. You know what mansplaining is? I guarantee you the women here do. But it's the first known instance of where somebody tells somebody who knows more than they do about the topic, hey, listen, you got it wrong. Let me tell you what it's like, right? So anyway, Peter says that. He says, it can't be right, can it? And Jesus says, yep, I'm afraid that's really what it's like. And he goes on, he says, and guess what? To Peter. He says, guess what? That's the same job description as the one you have. Disciple. And the disciples don't get it. Peter doesn't get it. The disciples don't get it. Now, this week, just a few verses later, now in chapter 9 of Mark, this time they're up in Galilee, and Jesus is again teaching those same disciples basically the same idea. He says, quote, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. And then the text says this, but they did not understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And then they get in trouble for arguing about something completely unrelated, like who's going to be first in the kingdom and who's going to be last. So again, the disciples just don't get it. Now, it's easy, I think, to read Mark's gospel and come away thinking that the disciples just weren't very bright, right? They never seemed to get it. Yeah? But I don't believe that's what's going on. I think the disciples were plenty smart. But we must remember that at the time that Mark is writing his gospel, his was the first of the four gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But Mark was written first, and it's about the year 55 or 60 or so. And being a member of this Jesus cult is still a very dangerous thing to do and be, right? So, I think it just might have been in Mark's interest and in the interest of this emerging movement to appear as non-threatening as possible to anyone in power who happened to read their formative documents. Okay? Nothing to see here. These guys are no threat to the emperor or to the Sadducees, just a bunch of dumb fishermen and a few poor folks. See? Because if they make the disciples out to be smart and dangerous, it's a threat to the community. They've already killed Jesus. Right? The martyrdoms, that's all going on. And so I think there's a sense here that if we can just make it seem like we don't really know what we're doing, right? But the underlying current to the people who are in the community, who are reading it, is completely different. All right. I think the takeaway in the 8th and 9th chapters of Mark is not the misunderstanding of the disciples, but the clear and true cost of the discipleship. That's the meaning for those in the community, which absolutely puts their lives at risk. And I believe that it has the same meaning for us today. I believe that if your faith, that is, your commitment to the life of faith, is not putting your life at risk, then it may not be gospel faith at all. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, Mark, slow your roll, right? Take it a little easy there, pal. Do you have to be so dramatic all the time, Mark, right? Oh, everything's always the biggest this and the worst that. But you're thinking to yourself, I didn't come here today to be beat up. I'm interested in being encouraged how to live a better life, but not to be told how to risk my life. Give me the good news. Give me God is love. Let's have that sermon. And I get that, you guys. So if you are not in the mood to be challenged in this way this morning, feel free to check out mentally. Work on your grocery list, or replay your last round of golf in your head, Brad. Or I'll be done in a few minutes, and you can check back in, okay? But if I'm honest, you guys, I absolutely believe that the good news is only good news if it disturbs you. I absolutely believe that this is the message of the Gospels and the witness of the early church. There was a time when you could get killed for following Christ. And I absolutely believe that today, the call to discipleship may not put you physically in danger. In fact, I hope and pray that it does not. But it will, in fact, it must put your life, that is, the life to which the world has called you, the life that you have worked so hard building, the life of ease and comfort, it must put that life at risk. What I mean is this. What part or parts of your life would you give up to follow Christ? So hang on, this is where it gets serious, all right? Let's start with money. It's the easiest one. It is. Let's just start with the easy one. How much money would you give to others if you got real about your relationship with God and with money? The average giver in mainline churches gives something like 1.5% to 1.7% of their income to all causes. How much would you give to follow Christ? 3%? 5%? 8%? 10%? Now, I say money is the easy one because money is so easy to come by, and it means so little, really, in the end, doesn't it? It really means so little in the end. Like, sure, you live on a budget. I get it. I do too. Yeah? Sure, you never have as much as you want at the end of the month. Neither do I. And of course, there are things, lots of things you want, and maybe you have some things that you crave, and maybe you're saving money to buy those things. So am I. But how much will a new computer or a new car change my life? Really? And the bigger question is, what am I willing to do to get those things? How much am I willing to scrimp and save and fuss and shop and worry and obsess? What does it gain me, really? Discipleship, now hear me, discipleship is not giving your money to some shyster preacher in church or on television, but it is changing your relationship with money and stuff so that they have the proper place in your life, so that they are right-sized in your life, not outsized. So, money's the easy one. Okay. What about ego? What about my status? What about my standing? What about my prestige? What about my reputation? Discipleship. Now, Jesus says this very plainly. Discipleship is working hard to be last, not first. Now, this is completely counterintuitive, isn't it? Because we grew up in a time and a place where there are winners and losers, and God help you if you're a loser. We live in a time and a place where second place is treated the same as last place. We live in a time and a place where hard work and intelligence and good looks and good genes and good inheritance and sometimes bad intentions create a toxic stew of selfishness that honestly we honor, we envy, we glorify. As individuals and as a society, we glorify. And I am saying that the gospel, the good news, demands that we examine that ordering of our lives and become willing to risk all of that in order to live in a new and godly way. And that this godly way is not only preferable, but purposeful, and peaceful and precious. What would you be willing to risk your current life for? What if I told you that the gospel offers something better? Something worth so much more than stuff or power or privilege? What if I told you it was eternal and righteous and glorious? Would you risk your current and comfortable life for something like that? That is the question that Mark asks today's readers. You have to be willing to dig in a little bit to find that question. But having found it, following Jesus demands that you actually answer it.